There are 7 signs that appear at the exact moment your life begins to shift. Not when you're calm, not when everything makes sense, but when the ground beneath you starts to crack in quiet, subtle ways. These signs don't show up to warn you. They show up to reveal you. Carl Jung believed that long before a spiritual awakening becomes visible, it begins deep inside, in a place the ego can't control. A place that whispers before it roars. So if lately you've felt a strange tension in your chest, a heaviness that doesn't match your day, a sense that something is ending or beginning and you can't name which, you are not breaking down. You are standing at the threshold of a major inner transformation. These are the 7 Jungian signs that you're on the edge of a spiritual awakening. And the first one appears long before you understand what's happening, long before you're ready for it. It begins with a quiet tension, the kind your soul recognizes even if your mind doesn't. Let's start there. Sign number 1, a sudden sensitivity to inner noise. When a spiritual awakening approaches, the world doesn't change first. You do, and the shift is subtle but undeniable. You suddenly become sensitive to everything happening inside you. It starts in small, almost invisible ways. You're sitting at a cafe, listening to someone talk about their day, and for some reason their words feel heavier than normal. You catch yourself drifting inward, noticing how their tone affects you, how your chest tightens slightly, how your mind begins asking questions you didn't invite. Or maybe you're driving home after a long day, the radio playing softly, and a memory you haven't thought about in years rises out of nowhere, not as a gentle reminder, but as a demand. It wants to be felt. It wants to be seen. You brush it away, but it lingers. The unconscious is no longer content with silence. Carl Jung said the unconscious makes itself known when the ego is no longer strong enough to carry the illusion of control. That's what this heightened sensitivity is. Your inner world refusing to stay buried. Suddenly, small things carry enormous weight. A comment from someone close hits deeper than usual. A messy room feels strangely overwhelming. An old song triggers unexpected emotion. A casual disagreement leaves you thinking about it all night. You become hyper-aware of everything. Your reactions, your impulses, your patterns, your wounds. And because you're feeling more, you start asking yourself questions like, why did that bother me so much? Where is this emotion coming from? Why does this situation feel different now? The truth is simple. You're not seeing life with the old filters anymore. You're seeing it with the clarity that comes right before a transformation. This is what Jung meant by shadow material resurfacing. All the things you learned to suppress, discomfort, anger, unmet needs, forgotten dreams, begin rising into consciousness. It's not chaos. It's exposure. A spiritual awakening doesn't begin with enlightenment. It begins with honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable. You're finally hearing the parts of yourself you ignored because life was too loud, too busy, too demanding. Now, the distractions don't work like they used to. The emotional numbness doesn't protect you the same way. You can't escape into old routines because your psyche won't let you. Your consciousness is widening, stretching, preparing you to meet a deeper version of yourself. But here's the part most people don't realize. Once you begin hearing the noise inside, you also begin noticing something else. Something far more disorienting. The things you used to hold on to. Relationships, habits, identities, routines, no longer feel the same. Some feel heavier. Some feel foreign. Some feel like they're quietly slipping away. And that shift is the next sign. Sign number 2. Old attachments begin to feel heavy. One of the clearest signs that you're approaching a spiritual awakening is this. What once felt comfortable begins to feel strangely heavy. Not painful, not toxic, just misaligned. It happens slowly at first. You wake up one morning and realize the conversations you're used to having, the small talk, the predictable complaints, the shallow routines, suddenly feel draining. You sit with people you've known for years and notice that the connection feels thinner, almost artificial, as if you're both reading from an old script you no longer resonate with. Psychologists like Donald Winnicott describe this moment as the beginning of the true self breaking through the roles you learned to play. It's not that others changed. It's that your inner world no longer fits inside the persona you built for survival. Maybe you notice it at work. Tasks you used to do automatically now feel hollow. The ambition that once fueled you doesn't land the same way. You feel a gentle, persistent push asking, is this really who I am? Is this where I belong? Or perhaps it shows up in relationships. A friend tells a familiar story, and instead of laughing like always, you feel a wave of emptiness. A partner expresses frustration, and instead of reacting, you feel distance, as if your soul is stepping back to observe rather than participate. This isn't detachment. It's awakening. Carl Jung wrote that when consciousness expands, anything that isn't aligned with your emerging self is felt first as discomfort. It's the psyche's way of saying, these attachments were meant for the person you were, not the person you're becoming. Viktor Frankl added another layer to this idea. When a person begins shifting toward meaning and authenticity, the structures of their old life loosen. People often interpret this as losing interest or becoming cold, but Frankl emphasized that it is actually a realignment toward deeper purpose. And in modern psychology, a 2019 study from the University of Zurich showed that when identity begins to shift, even before the shift is complete, old habits and relationships feel heavier because they no longer reinforce the emerging sense of self. The brain literally spends more energy trying to maintain old patterns than building new ones, creating emotional exhaustion. This is why you might feel tired around certain people, even if nothing bad happens. Why conversations feel repetitive. Why you sense a quiet distance where there used to be ease. It's not rejection. It's resonance. Alan Watts described it beautifully. When you grow, you don't have to let go of people. They simply no longer cling to you, because the old hand you offered them is no longer there. Sometimes the heaviness is emotional. Sometimes it's physical. Your body tenses when you walk into certain places or engage in routines that no longer match the truth rising inside you. And sometimes it's subtle. A certain friend's voice feels louder than it used to. Scrolling social media feels more irritating than entertaining. You crave silence more than stimulation. Even clothes you used to love feel like costumes that no longer represent you. Nothing is wrong. You're not becoming distant. You're becoming real. Because as the unconscious rises and the self begins its slow emergence, your psyche loses tolerance for what is inauthentic, no matter how familiar it once was. But this heaviness leads directly to something deeper and far more challenging. When your attachments feel misaligned, the parts of you that you've ignored, suppressed, or rejected, the shadow, begin to surface. Sign number 3, the shadow steps forward. When the old structures of your life begin to loosen, the unconscious senses an invitation, a soft crack in the walls you spent years building. Through that crack, something long ignored begins to rise. This is the moment when the shadow steps forward. Jung saw the shadow as the hidden archive of your psyche. Every emotion you pushed away, every desire you dismissed, every truth you silenced to fit the world around you. Not because these parts were wrong, but because expressing them once felt unsafe. And during a spiritual awakening, these buried parts refuse to stay hidden. You feel it in your daily life in ways that feel strangely disproportionate. A comment hits too hard. A memory returns with unexpected force. A small disappointment makes your chest tighten. You react to something simple as if it carried years of weight, because it does. What surfaces is not the present moment, but the past demanding recognition. James Hollis teaches that the shadow rises not to punish you, but to liberate you. It forces you to face the unexamined parts of your inner world, so you can finally grow beyond who you were conditioned to be. The discomfort is a sign of breakthrough, not breakdown. Few films capture this psychological truth more perfectly than Black Swan, directed by Darren Aronofsky and starring Natalie Portman, who won an Oscar for her performance. Portman plays Nina, a ballerina obsessed with perfection. At first glance, she embodies purity, discipline, control, the persona Jung described as the identity we craft to survive within society. But beneath her polished surface lies a storm: repressed ambition, anger, sexuality, instinct, and fear of inadequacy. Everything she denies in herself becomes everything she must confront. The film isn't just about ballet. It's a study of fragmentation, a woman divided between who she thinks she must be and who she truly is. As Nina prepares for the dual role of the White Swan and the Black Swan, Aronofsky uses mirrors, hallucinations, and distortions to expose the psychological rupture unfolding inside her. The mirrors represent the clash between persona and shadow. The hallucinations symbolize the unconscious forcing itself into awareness. The physical transformation scenes echo the painful rebirth of an identity shedding its skin. Nina's breakdown is not madness. It is the inevitable eruption of everything she suppressed to maintain an illusion of purity. Her shadow doesn't destroy her. It completes her performance. What terrifies her is not the darkness emerging, but the power within that darkness, the raw, unfiltered truth of herself. And this mirrors real spiritual awakening. You begin to see parts of yourself you avoided for years. The good girl persona cracks, and behind it you find anger you never expressed. The strong one you presented to the world begins to shake, revealing needs you suppressed since childhood. The version of you built for survival begins to dissolve, revealing the person who was buried beneath responsibility, expectations, and fear. This is why awakening feels destabilizing. It's not because you're falling apart. It's because the false self is falling away. Nina's journey is an extreme artistic metaphor, but the psychological truth behind it is universal. You cannot rise into who you truly are without meeting the parts of yourself you abandoned. And as the shadow steps into the light, something else awakens beside it, something just as symbolic, just as ancient, and far more mysterious. The unconscious begins speaking through images, visions, and nighttime stories that feel too vivid to ignore. Dreams. Sign number 4. Dreams become messages. At first, the change is subtle. A dream feels unusually vivid. A person from your past appears with intense clarity. A landscape unfolds that you've never seen before, but somehow recognize. You brush it off, but something inside you knows these images are not random. They carry weight. They feel deliberate. Jung believed dreams emerge when the conscious mind refuses to see something. The unconscious steps in, compensating for what daylight cannot handle. And during a spiritual awakening, when the unconscious rises quickly, dreams become sharper and more symbolic. They stop behaving like stories and start behaving like messages. You may find yourself dreaming of walking through a door, standing at the edge of a cliff, climbing a staircase that seems endless. These images are not puzzles to be solved. They are reflections of your psychological state. A threshold represents transition. Falling can reflect the fear of losing control. Rising water often mirrors emotions you've suppressed for years. The dream speaks the language of the soul because the soul does not speak in logic. It speaks in symbols. And sometimes the dream speaks through emotion rather than imagery. You wake overwhelmed, on the verge of tears, without remembering more than a fragment of the scene. The feeling is the message. The psyche is pulling truth upward faster than your waking mind can translate it. Other nights, the dream feels like a rehearsal. You confront someone you've avoided for years. You express anger you never allow yourself to show in waking life. You walk away from a place you've outgrown. You make a choice you've been too afraid to make. The unconscious is preparing you, strengthening you for the changes that are already unfolding on the inside. This is why dreams during awakening often feel more real than waking life. They are not weighed down by social norms, expectations, or the persona you built to survive. They reveal the unfiltered truth of who you are and who you are becoming. They show you what needs to be healed, what needs to be claimed, what needs to be released. Even patterns you don't consciously notice begin repeating. A recurring animal symbolizing instinct, a recurring room representing memory, a recurring person carrying a message you haven't yet understood. The unconscious becomes insistent. It is trying to reorganize your inner world, piece by piece, night after night, so that your waking self can eventually follow. And then something even stranger begins to happen. The dream symbolism refuses to stay in the night. A number you saw in the dream appears on a street sign. A phrase someone said echoes in a conversation the next day. A person you dreamed about reaches out unexpectedly. It's as if your inner world is leaking into the outer one, blurring the line between what happens inside you and what unfolds around you. Dreams prepare the ground. Synchronicities plant the seeds. Sign number 5. Synchronicities multiply. You start noticing patterns, not because you're imagining them, but because you're finally awake enough to see them. Jung called these moments synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that carry psychological and spiritual significance. They're not random, not accidental, not just a coincidence. They appear when your inner world and outer world begin to mirror each other with startling precision. At first, these moments are small. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and a message from them arrives that same day. You dream about water rising, and the next morning, a stranger in a cafe is discussing a documentary about oceans. You feel the sudden urge to revisit an old hobby, and then a video about that very topic appears on your feed, even though you haven't searched for it in months. These moments make you pause, but soon they become impossible to ignore. Psychologists like Bernard Beitman, often called the father of coincidence studies, argues that synchronicities spike during periods of identity transformation, moments when the psyche is reorganizing itself and looking for new pathways. He describes these events as psycho-spiritual GPS signals, guiding you toward alignment with your deeper self. His lectures at the University of Virginia emphasize that synchronicities are not passive experiences, they're invitations. And if you pay attention, they multiply. You start noticing numbers repeating: 1111, 333, 444. Not because they're magical in themselves, but because your attention is sharpening. The psyche is training you to notice, to see connections you previously dismissed, to understand that your life is speaking to you in a symbolic code. Cinema captures this phenomenon better than any psychological textbook. Take The Matrix, for instance. Neo begins sensing that something is wrong not through logical explanations, but through patterns. The black cat glitch, repeated phrases, déjà vu moments that signal an underlying truth breaking through the illusion. Synchronicity is the first crack in the facade, the whisper that the world you see is not the whole story. Or consider Interstellar. Cooper follows what he thinks is gravity anomalies in his daughter's room, books falling, dust patterns shifting. But they're not random events. They're messages, synchronicities engineered by a deeper intelligence guiding him toward his true path. The message is clear. The universe rearranges itself when your inner transformation demands a new direction. The same thing happens when you're on the edge of a spiritual awakening. Life begins orchestrating itself around your psychological state. Not magically, but symbolically. The psyche seeks coherence, and synchronicities are its way of bridging the gap between the seen and unseen. You hear a phrase in a podcast that perfectly summarizes your current emotional struggle. You stumble upon a lecture, maybe from Jordan Peterson, Gabor Mate, or Eckhart Tolle, where the speaker articulates something you've been feeling but couldn't explain. You watch a random YouTube video where the narrator says exactly what you needed to hear. You meet someone who shares a story identical to your own internal conflict. These experiences may feel eerie, but they are not supernatural. They are psychological alignment. Gabor Mate often says that the body speaks through symptoms, but Jung expands this idea to the psyche. The world speaks through synchronicities when the inner voice becomes too powerful to ignore. It's like life starts underlining certain sentences for you. Even everyday experiences shift. You walk into a bookstore and a particular title seems to glow on the shelf, not literally, but emotionally, magnetically. You overhear a stranger talking about the exact topic your dream presented the night before. You find an old journal entry randomly, and inside it, a sentence that suddenly feels prophetic. This is the unconscious, no longer content to live in the dark, now collaborating with the outer world to guide your transformation. James Hollis describes synchronicities as acausal connecting principles, events without a clear physical cause, but with undeniable psychological impact. And lectures from contemporary thinkers like Rupert Sheldrake, who studies morphic resonance, suggest that meaning itself is a field we move through, influencing what we notice and what we attract. Whether one interprets this scientifically, spiritually, symbolically, or intuitively doesn't matter. The effect is the same. Synchronicities shift your perception. They break your certainty. They soften your skepticism. They invite curiosity, presence, humility. Synchronicities are the psyche's way of saying, pay attention, something is unfolding. And at this stage of awakening, the messages become more personal, more intimate, more revealing. A song you haven't heard in years plays at the exact moment you're questioning a decision. A quote appears in a video, and it feels written specifically for you. Someone shares a story that mirrors your internal landscape, so precisely it feels orchestrated. You begin to sense that your life is not happening to you. It's happening with you. And as these signs accumulate, something profound begins to dawn on you. The person you've been pretending to be, the persona, is becoming too small, too tight, too limited for the self that is emerging underneath. Which leads to the next sign. Sign number 6. Your identity starts to feel too small. As synchronicities intensify, something subtle but unmistakable begins to happen inside you. The identity you've worn for years starts to feel tight, almost like clothing that no longer fits, even though it's the same outfit you've always worn. It shows up in small, disorienting ways. You hear yourself telling a familiar story and suddenly realize you don't relate to it anymore. You step into roles you once played effortlessly and feel a quiet resistance in your chest. You laugh at a joke you would have found funny in the past, and it lands flat, hollow, strangely distant. Jung believed this moment marks the beginning of individuation, the unraveling of the persona, the social mask you crafted to navigate the world. Not because the mask was fake, but because you've outgrown it. Life begins reflecting this shift back to you. People respond to you differently. Your interests change without warning. Your old goals feel disconnected from your new emotional landscape. You sense a growing gap between the person others think you are and the person rising inside you. It's not a crisis of identity, it's the expansion of identity. And for a brief moment, you may feel lost. Not because you don't know who you are, but because you're no longer willing to be who you were. This tension, this quiet shedding, is uncomfortable, but it's also the clearest sign that something larger is trying to emerge. Something more authentic, more grounded, more whole. And that emergence leads directly to the final sign. Sign number 7, the self begins to emerge. When the old identity loosens, something deeper rises to take its place. It doesn't arrive loudly. It appears in brief flashes, moments where you feel unmistakably aligned with who you truly are. Jung called this quiet emergence of the self the most meaningful step in psychological growth. Not becoming someone new, but returning to the person you were before fear and conditioning shaped you. You notice it in subtle ways. A sudden honesty slips out effortlessly. A boundary forms without guilt. A moment of clarity cuts through confusion like clean light. These moments are brief, but they land with weight. They reveal a center inside you, steady, grounded, quietly powerful. Your values begin to shift. What mattered before starts to feel irrelevant. You begin choosing differently, speaking differently, holding yourself differently. And though the ego trembles at this change, something within you whispers, "This is who you are." At this point, awakening is no longer about signs. It's about stepping into a life shaped by truth rather than habit. And that brings us to the final movement of this journey. A spiritual awakening doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds quietly, sign by sign, until the life you once lived no longer fits the person you're becoming. And when the self finally steps forward, everything inside you knows. There's no going back, only going deeper. If this resonates with you, stay close. Our next video will take you even further into this journey of inner transformation. And if you felt seen here, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this with someone walking their own path. Your awakening has already begun.